Okay, so I wanted to record this video to discuss quickly the Generation 1 and Generation 2 Samsung Freestyle projector. As many of you know, Samsung announced the new second generation update in January of this year, and even now in August, there's very little information about the projector. Specifically, I wanted to compare how Gen 1 compares to Gen 2, which is just releasing this week. I wanted to compare the two projectors in terms of a few different criteria that I know gave quite a few individuals issues with the first one, namely the brightness of the two projectors, the ability of the projector to allow the user to navigate quickly in the menus. Also, I'm going to cover the ability of the projector to do auto picture very quickly. And finally, I will touch on a few other areas. Specifically, I will discuss whether or not the two projectors have any meaningful differences, and also whether those differences make ultimately a worthwhile purchase for you to go and spend more money on Gen 2. So the first test I did was to compare the brightness between the two projectors, because I think this was the most common issue identified with the first generation by pretty much all the reviewers. As you will see in the following few clips, I did not observe any major differences between the two projectors. I found the brightness to be as close as possible in terms of, just looking at it visually. And also I found that even during daytime, there was no real difference. Any differences were simply due to the position of the iPhone camera that I'm using to record everything, and also potentially the location next to the window. So overall, there is no difference between Gen 1 and Gen 2 that I can detect visually. One thing to keep in mind is that quite a few individuals said that the projector is not bright enough to use during daytime, and I agree. However, I also feel that for those situations, it's much more preferable to use a brighter television, maybe even something like the Samsung 22 or later frame, which has an anti-glare shield on it, has an anti-glare film, which allows it to be much more useful in bright scenes. I should have also said earlier that in addition to making sure that each of the units was updated to the latest firmware, I also made sure that all of the picture settings were exactly the same between the two units, just to make sure that it's a proper apple-to-apple comparison. Next topic I wanted to touch on is how is the user interface. So again, quite a few individuals, reviewers, professional YouTubers have identified the fact that Generation 1 was quite a bit sluggish. I ended up updating both of the machines to the latest available firmware, and I did notice that in fact Generation 2 does seem to be faster. I've seen information out there stating that maybe Samsung has increased the amount of memory, or maybe the processor is faster, or some combination of the two. But whatever the update was, Generation 2 does feel snappier, and in many ways how Generation 1 should have been from the very beginning. Having said this, is it worth potentially paying a few $100s more to get Generation 2 for simply better user experience? Honestly, I would say that it is not. The primary reason being that once you are out of the menus, so for example, you start to stream something, there really is no major difference between, the two machines. They will play videos just exactly the same. So once you're out of the menus, there is no difference. And even as I was testing the two systems, I know it's sometimes difficult to record on the camera, but ultimately I found that both Gen 1 and Gen 2 worked well enough. So the third factor I wanted to compare is the difference in the two projectors in terms of things such as auto keystone, autofocus, etc. So I found that both of the projectors worked well enough. I think they were smart enough to create a pleasing picture, whether I projected onto a wall or onto a ceiling, and they were both relatively fast in terms of adapting to changes in angles. I know a few individuals had issues with this, and I'm not really sure if it was user error, if it was updated at some point using firmware, but I found the two units to be relatively good. They would provide maybe a 95% picture, and it was easy enough to just make a few minor tweaks if required. Again, as is the case with most of this review, as you can tell probably by this point, I did not observe any meaningful differences between the two generations in terms of how fast or how good the mechanism was for adjusting the picture automatically. Next, I also wanted to quickly discuss the hinge. There really, again, is no major difference in the mechanism for adjusting the angle between the two units. In fact, physically, I would be very hard pressed to find any differences between the two models unless I'm actually in the menu on the unit, or if I'm examining the product code. So physically, as far as I can tell, there are no observable differences between the two units. And therefore, I think that if you had issues with the first gen in terms of the angle, I think that those same issues would be present. However, in my case, I found both of the units able to hold the angle quite well. So the next bit, I wanted to take a few minutes to just discuss the differences between the two units. And the one big difference that Samsung has been promoting is the fact that Gen 2, again, likely due to more memory or more processing power or some combination of the two, it's also able to integrate the gaming hub. So what you can do with Gen 2 is you can connect a Bluetooth controller to the unit, and then over Wi-Fi you can stream games, whether it's Xbox or any of the other cloud gaming services. So while this feature is nice, again, I'm not necessarily feeling that this is something that I would spend quite a bit more money on Gen 2, simply because I have other systems that I can use, and also cloud gaming does require very fast and very stable Wi-Fi, which is not necessarily always available if you're traveling, as is one of the use cases for buying such a small and portable projector. The other difference that Samsung mentioned initially, and seems like they're not mentioning it as much recently, is the fact that you can combine two Freestyle second generation projectors to create one much larger picture. Now, again, this is one of those things that sounds nice on paper, but in practice, it's difficult to accomplish because number one, you need to buy two projectors, which defeats the purpose of buying something that's small and portable. And also, as it turns out, on iOS, which is what I currently have, you can only use two projectors to view a large image. You cannot currently on iOS, so iPhones, iPads, etc., you're not able to combine two Gen 2 projectors to stream one large video. And then the third difference is, again, I would say a relatively small one. There is a difference between the two controllers. The main difference being that the second generation controller has a dedicated button for settings. On Gen 1, what you need to do is press and hold the home button. That brings up the shortcut for the menu. On Gen 2, as I said, there's a dedicated button for settings that you find on pretty much all the other Samsung remotes. And then in addition to this, again, as is similar with all the other Samsung remotes that have come out in, I would say, the last 2-3 years, Gen 2 also includes a small solar panel, which means that you can charge the controller simply by leaving it on a table, and it can use natural sunlight or artificial light to charge. Otherwise, both of them can also be charged using USB-C. So in conclusion, would I say that it's worthwhile buying the second generation Samsung Freestyle? I would say that honestly it is not. I found most of the differences to be extremely small or non-existent. This is especially true now that you can find Gen 1 Freestyle often at 50%, 30%, or other type of a discount, which is a sizable difference for this projector. Keep in mind that many retailers are currently, while the product second gen Freestyle is just being released, many of them are including free promotional items such as the official Samsung battery pack. Some are including the carry case, and some are actually including both. So this does offset and change the value dynamic a little bit, but overall I would say that if you're able to buy the first generation Samsung Freestyle, especially at a significant discount, I would say that that is the much better choice